9 o'clock. Harrison County Commission meeting for September 28th to order. You will rise and join the invocation and pledge, please.
Please join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anyone signed up to speak? Is there anyone on Zoom that wishes to speak publicly? Anyone on Zoom wish to speak publicly? We will move to number 2 for consent agenda. What's the pleasure? Motion to approve number 2 consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Number 3, payroll change notices. We have A, B, and C. Motion to approve A through C. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Number 4, minutes and or amended minutes of previous meeting A and B. The dates are there. Move to approve as presented. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None, motion carried. Number 5, requisitions, purchase orders, and invoices as shown on A, vendor requisition list of payments. What's the pleasure? Motion to approve. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Number 6, exoneration corrective tickets, joint property applications. It appears we just have exonerations and corrective tickets A and B. What's the pleasure? Motion to approve A and B. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Number 7, consideration of approval of a project fund requisition for the payment of costs associated with the project to be financed from proceeds of the Series 2019 bonds issued from Charles Point Economic Opportunity Development District Series 2021 A and B, Development District number 3, White Oak Project number 2, and Series 2008A, Charles Point Project number 2, Northland Bay Improvements, and there are 2A and B. Sure. Motion to approve A and B. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Number 8, review, discuss, consider GSA update, potential executive session pursuant to 69A 4B9 to consider matters involving or affecting the purchase, sale, or lease of property, advanced construction planning, the investment of public funds, or other matters involving commercial competition, which may, if made public, might adversely affect the financial or other interest of the county. Do we have anything for number 8 this time?
No, ma'am, I do not have anything. We do have a meeting with them on Friday, so we'll have information to bring back to the commissioners after Friday.
With that, move on to 9. Okay, number 9, consideration of approval of project fund requisitions for the payment of costs associated with the General Services Administration Building project to be financed from proceeds of the Series 2020 bonds issued for the Harrison County Building Commission. A, requisition number 73 of Wright Corn for $120,276.06. Motion to approve number 9A. Any discussion?
We go all right with it.
Yes, this is work that they have completed and that has been agreed upon to pay out.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. I have 9:05 and we have a public nuisance at 9:05 for Russell and Melissa Rogers of Mount Clair. Russell and Melissa Rogers here. Russell and Melissa Rogers, are they in the hallway?
I do not see Charlotte. I'm getting a message.
President, and this carry this over to next week. Maybe 2 weeks from now, before we send it over to the administrator.
I mean, it looks like they've been served.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason that we can't act on this today.
Okay.
Not- Did not appear.
Send it to the judge.
So, motion to send it to search court. Is that correct? Okay. Any discussions? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. We'll send it to you.
I will.
Number 10, review, discuss, consider Lake Floyd PSD first draw ARPA funds allotment of $132,129.77. Motion to approve. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Review, discuss, consider permission to travel Paul Bump, Camp Dawson, Preston County, from the 25th through the 29th of September for the SIEC meeting. It's like E911.
What's the SID system?
State interoperability comms meeting. It's for state radio system, the siren system. Yes. With his position on the board for the SIEC, they actually cover his meals and lodging and everything else. The only expense we incur is the county vehicle traveling to.
Yes, next.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None, motion carried. Number 12, review, discuss, consider Otis service and repair of elevator, jail annex, seems from storm damage.
That is correct. when we had the transformer go bad. And it affected some things. This is one of those, the elevator. Everything that's out of the building.
Both of them down or just one?
I believe it's just one.
Take this out.
This will come out of probably courthouse improvement fund.
Question I have is, have we resolved the issue with water getting in? Isn't that the storm, where did this water come from? Did it come from the basement, the garage? Has it passed?
I'm not sure on that.
I mean, we need the elevator. We need to make sure that water issue has been resolved or gets resolved.
Absolutely.
I think we've had water there for a while. Motion to move forward and approve. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Any opposed?
No.
Opposition? Motion carried. And we have 9/11. And number 13, review, discuss, consider permission to travel RFPs from October 16th through October 18th at Lake Springs, the West Virginia Educational Conference on Litter Control and Solid Waste. Motion to approve. Is there any discussion?
Sending anybody from planning along.
This one, I think, since we're just discussing, there's a lot that will be centered around the litter control officer. Solid Waste Authority is actually paying for me to go down. Into,
They're covering your salary.
they're covering all my expenses. The only expenses charged to the county will be my mileage.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Review, discuss, consider resolution authorizing the county to purchase and request for qualified expenditures by Harrison County Clerk's Office as per the 2022 HABA, which is Help America Vote Act Security Grant Program. Do we?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
And this is, will be for the portion of the security of storage and of the equipment and the machines. And it will cover a cage, is that what it is?
Yep.
And locking cage, so it pays 85% of that, which would be $2,440.79. County match is $430.
Motion to approve and move forward with the application, is that correct?
And if I can say this, I do need all three commissioners' signatures on this form, if I can get it, please.
To affix the signatures as well as the motion? Okay. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. A review, discuss, consider paying IT interns $12 per hour as temporary employees.
So a while back, commission did authorize us to hire a few interns for IT. The problem we're at now is some of the IT students who we don't have to pay them a salary aren't available until the end of, in the spring timeframe, towards the end of schools out. So with this, by paying IT interns $12 an hour, the idea behind it was to get 3 interns, 20 hours a week, 12 hours apiece, and have them for 6 weeks, and that would be around $5,000 for that help. But then that way, that could help us with taking care of all the computers that we purchased to move next door, help setting those up, helping with the transition, going next door and everything like that.
Motion to approve number 15. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. And we have 9:15. I have 9:15. We have a hearing on the Watson estate. We have individuals here for the Watson estate.
I'm sorry, he can't hear you.
Alan, okay. You filed a petition of some sort, is that correct? Okay. Was everybody served with notice of this?
My brother Brian was not served. He did not get his paperwork. Let me see, okay. Yeah, my brother, my oldest brother
Okay,
Brian.
hold on, let's one step at a time. Okay. Anyone that's going to testify or wishes to say anything at this hearing, would you please raise your right hand?
Say something.
If you're going to testify in the hearing, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, but nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay. Okay, why are we here, Mr. Watson?
I got the Keith's will and I didn't have the original. So I got the copy and they said I had to come in front of you guys to say that it's okay to use the copy instead of the original. Well, I think the original might be in the safe deposit box and I can't get in the safe deposit box until I get the paper to okay it.
Did you want to,
Well, I'm Keith's daughter and
let me identify yourself?
I'm Patricia Watson. That's my name.
And where you're from?
I'm from Hepzibah, West Virginia. And I have a problem with all of the will, everything. And myself and my brothers are wanting to contest it. And they told us that we needed to be here today for the start of that process.
That is not, you'd have to file something in order to.
Right, they
Plus
told me
it has to
that.
be probated before you can do that.
Right, that's what they were telling me today was the start of the whole process. We needed to get here.
Do you wish to?
Yes, I'm Susan Watson. I'm Keith's sister-in-law. I don't know where the original will went to. We went with him when he went to a lawyer and did this. Keith had suffered for about 6.5 years with cancer. Unfortunately, in July, he took his life. And we're just here to get it all straightened out.
So you're wanting to probate the copy? is what you want.
So it's okay for.
But then if you find the original, you can. Is there anything else?
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah.
Just in remote, well, in a motion to let them probate the copy of the will. Yeah, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? None, motion carried. Number 16, review, discuss, consider proposed list of commission meetings and schedule for the rest of 2022.
So this is the schedule we came out with the idea of going to every other week, moving it to 9 AM. Trying to work around some holidays that we have that pop up in October and November. So this is the schedule that I would like to present to the commission to approve for the rest of the year.
Appreciate that they moved October 5th to October 6th.
I have to go get the hearing book, that way we can make sure that no hearings is scheduled. We have a proclamation scheduled for the 5th. We also have the VFW coming for a funding request on the 5th. That looks to be,
What's the pleasure? Number 16. I'm gonna make a motion to accept the calendar, the schedule as presented. Any discussion?
As Madam President, I think I've been more cooperative with everybody else as far as working with dates and times, and this is the first time that I've asked for date change. So, attended meetings, canceled appointments, been here, so that's
I think we've all done
the
that.
5th to be the, to change to the 6th.
I
That's
amend my
right.
motion.
That's-
Sorry. No, that's fine. We'll amend the motion to, instead of on the 5th, now we've got to call these people and see if they can come on the 6th. Okay. I'll amend my motion to.
so by having it moved to the 6th, we'll have to call these entities
It's not a big deal.
and get them switched over.
Okay, we will move October 5th to October 6th.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Laura, do you have anything for your report?
No.
Mr. Nichols?
I'd like to reserve comment till after presentation.
Kelly, do you have anybody else with you? You're 1 minute early. so-
All right.
So if you want to begin, you can.
Sure. Would you like me to just to stay here
That's
or
whatever makes you
Okay.
comfortable.
are you able to advance slides for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you all for inviting me to be here today. My name is Kelly Allen. I'm the Executive Director of the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy. And for folks who may not be familiar, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank. We do research and analysis on state tax and budget issues and how proposals and plans would impact working West Virginia families. This property tax amendment has been long discussed in the legislature. I think we put out our first report on the resolution that ultimately became this amendment in 2010. So we've been covering it and researching it for a pretty long time. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the potential stakes for Harrison County. And basically what we've been doing is putting together county by county analyses of the potential impacts on county budgets, on school systems, on municipalities, just to make sure folks, leaders, local leaders, and community members are really aware of what the fiscal impacts of the amendment could be. All right, so next slide, please. I always like to start just by showing the language in the amendment, because I think it just shows how confusing it is. To amend the state constitution by providing the legislature with authority to exempt tangible machinery and equipment, personal property directly used in business activity, and tangible inventory personal property directly used in business activity, and personal property tax on motor vehicles from ad valorem property taxation by general law. It's confusing, right? I talked to my grandmother-in-law Sunday, and she said, I read all the amendments and I have no idea what any of them would do. So I think it's really important that we are able to, make these in plain language and make sure folks understand, like, what does this actually mean for Harrison County? What does this mean for fire services and schools and emergency response and all those sorts of things. So the next slide just tries to get at, what does amendment actually to actually do? And I think even backing up before that, it's important to say, what do property taxes actually do? And most of the folks in this room know, but I'll say it anyway. Over 99% of property taxes fund local public services. The vast majority school services, but also a lot of things that counties and municipalities provide. That protection for property taxes has been in our state constitution since the 1930s, since the Depression era. They were put there. I don't know, exactly what folks were thinking at the time, but I think it was a desire of leadership in the state and local governments to protect funding for local public services that are so important. So Amendment 2 would actually take about 27% of total property taxes, the business machinery and equipment, the inventory tax, and the personal vehicle tax, and essentially carve those out of the Constitution and give the authority over those property taxes to the legislature. So it's just a segment of property taxes. It's just like a certain chunk that the legislature wants. And we know, as we've been working on this since 2010, the major priority of the legislature that they've told us is to exempt the business taxes. They want to do away with machinery and equipment and the inventory tax. So what that would do would, open the door for the legislature to eliminate $515 million in property taxes statewide. That will have a lot of impacts on local communities. Again, that funding will no longer be enshrined or protected in the Constitution. The legislature would be able to eliminate it. We're also concerned about the impact that could have on excess levies that have been voter approved. So if you exempt 27% of property taxes and you take them out of the pool, you're essentially losing about 27% of the value of your excess levies. So things that voters have approved, in many cases overwhelmingly, non-school levies have to be approved by 60% of the voters. Those could lose some of their value. And of course, it doesn't immediately remove the car tax or the business personal property. So next slide. And this just kind of shows how much various counties are impacted. So the amount that your county is impacted depends on your mix of property taxes, right? So the blue and dark blue counties are the ones that are most heavily impacted by this, where the white and yellow counties are less impacted. And it kind of makes sense if you're thinking about machinery and equipment. These are most concentrated in coal field counties, right? So you can see the southern coal fields are really, really impacted. You can see north central West Virginia is really, really impacted because of industry and oil and gas and coal here. And then the northern panhandle, of course, is really impacted too. So the least impacted county is at risk of losing 7% of the property tax revenue. The most impacted county is at risk of losing 37%. And Harrison County is up there. About a quarter of your property tax revenue could be lost under Amendment 2 and subsequent legislation if the legislature exempts all of those categories from taxation. Next slide, please. And again, why is this important? We talked about it a little bit, but over 99% of property taxes stay in your local community. Statewide, about 2/3 of it go to schools. Actually, let's go to the next slide because I think it's this breakdown specifically for Harrison County. That'll be more relevant here. So again, Harrison County looks pretty similar to the statewide numbers. 60% goes to your county school districts here. That's over $55 million a year. 11 million goes to municipalities. A quarter of it goes to you all in the county government and the services that you provide. And that tiny little sliver, less than 1/2 of 1% goes to state governments. And I always think that's interesting to point out. Because again, we're talking about the legislature taking control over 27% of property taxes statewide, 25 in Harrison County, but they don't provide services with that funding, right? They get like a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent, but again, want to have control over a much, much larger section of the pie. Next slide, please. So in Harrison County specifically, under Amendment 2 and subsequent legislative action, Harrison County is at risk in total of losing about $18.5 million in property tax revenue. So again, that's divided across schools, counties, and municipalities. Around, oh my gosh, a little over $9 million could be lost to the schools, about $6.5 million annually to the counties, and almost $3 million annually to the municipalities. And just to hone in on the schools a little bit, I think when I've been talking to a lot of people, there's been a perception that the state school aid formula would hold schools harmless in all of this. There is a state school aid formula that's protected in our Constitution that says that per student, there has to be a minimum amount of funding. So that means that the state will have to make up some of the losses to county schools automatically, but not all of it. Statewide, the average is that the state school aid formula would make up about 85% of the regular levy losses. But that still leaves 1.8 million just for the regular school levy that would not automatically be made up through the state school aid formula. And then, of course, the school excess levy, the state school aid formula doesn't affect that at all. So if you're at risk of losing, 25.5% of your school excess levy, that could be $7.3 million a year. And I'm not exactly sure what the school excess levy pays for in Harrison County. Maybe somebody else is, but a lot of times that's extracurricular programs, summer programs, building improvements. That could be personnel. So those are a lot of things that are at risk as well. And then, of course, $6.5 million to the county and $2.8 million to municipalities. And one thing I think about a lot in terms of this is, if the state legislature had the authority to exempt these taxes, they kind of get to do the fun part, right? They get to do the tax cut, like, yeah, woo-hoo. But they don't have to make those hard decisions about what would be cut as a result. Those hard decisions would really be shifted onto you all, on school boards, onto city councils and mayors. Like, how do we fill this hole? And I know you all are required to get rid of non-constitutionally required services first, and there's a lot of complications there, but those hard decisions really seem to be put onto local governments. Next slide, please. This just dives a little bit more into specifically the potential school funding that could be lost. So I won't say too much more about that, but it just shows total property tax funding that goes to our schools and the regular levy and the excess levy. And the yellow is what could be lost. And then the blue sliver on the left is what would be actually definitely made up through the school aid formula. Next slide. Just kind of putting that into totality as a percentage of this total Harrison County school budget. In fiscal year 2020, the Harrison County school budget was about $127 million. So if Harrison County schools lost $9 million, that could be about 7% of the school budget, just to put that in perspective. And then next slide, please. And it looks a lot scarier for the county budget that you all have. So if we're talking about eliminating $6.6 million from the county budget, I went back and looked at your 2020-2021 budget. The revised general fund was about $25 million. So if that's representative of a normal year, that could be just over a quarter of the Harrison County budget in total could be at risk through Amendment 2 and subsequent legislative action. Next slide. And then this just looks specifically at the excess levies in Harrison County. The two countywide levies that you all have in effect right now are the vital services levy and the mass transit levy. And again, excess levies are passed by voters by 60% margin. They fund very specific projects and services. And if you take away, 25% out of your property tax pool, then you're losing essentially 25% of the excess levies value. So that's how that would impact current levies. Over 1.2 million could be lost a year for vital services, and over 500,000 for mass transit. And then I also like to talk about, like, what does that mean for the next levy? So if you go, if your property tax pool shrinks by 25% and you want to pass $1 million levy, the next time that levy is only going to either be worth 750,000, or you're going to have to ask the property taxpayers who remain, residential homeowners, commercial building owners, small business owners, to either pay more or the levy is worth less. Next slide, please. This just kind of talks about the breakdown of the $515 million. Overwhelmingly, this is a tax cut for businesses. Over 70% of the tax cuts, the machinery and equipment and inventory and other business personal property, that makes up the biggest chunk of this tax cut that we're talking about, where the personal vehicle exemption is relatively small. Okay, excellent. All right, so I did want to take a minute to talk about the Senate plan that's been presented. Essentially, the Senate plan is a sheet for each county that says, this is how much money we will give you each year. And they say that they're able to do that through built up surplus. But our team actually did a whole analysis of the Senate plan and found a lot of the things that we thought were concerning about it. And I just wanted to highlight those for a minute, if that's okay. One of those problems is that they base their estimate that they have this extra space to give 550 million plus back to the counties every year based on an average of revenues over the last several years. And they bake into that average the last 2 years, which were very aberrant and very abnormal for West Virginia. For one, we had over 12 billion with a B federal dollars come into West Virginia through COVID relief through various means. So that meant, we all know that meant stimulus checks, that meant child tax credits, that meant unemployment. And that had an impact on state revenues because it boosted income tax collections, right? PPP loans for small businesses, that boosted income tax collections. When folks had more money to spend, that boosted sales tax collections. So it kind of made our revenues look a little bit higher, right? For the last 2 years, we've also had really high energy prices, and that's resulted in severance tax collections being up. So there's all these kind of like aberrant things that have happened in the last 2 years that we cannot count on. We have a boom and bust state, right? All energy states are boom and bust. We have really good times and really down times when energy prices come down. And these are things that it's really dangerous to assume will continue, especially the COVID relief. We know there's no more money coming from the federal government in that sense at the level that it came for the last 2 years. And the other piece of this on the spending side is that we've heard from the Senate and the governor and others that we've been able to have a flat budget for 4 years. The state budget has been 4.6 billion, 4.6 billion, 4.6 billion with no inflation over the last few years. And the federal relief is actually the same reason that we've been able to do that. So we haven't been spending less money providing services at state agencies and various things. What we've actually been doing is we've been able to supplant state dollars with federal dollars. So in addition to the money that's come to individuals and small businesses through COVID relief, we've also seen a lot of money come into state agencies through grants and programs and things like that. One example is that for the last 2 years, we've been getting an increased federal Medicaid match. So Medicaid is a shared federal and state program. The feds have been giving us the equivalent of about $200 million a year extra. That's assumed to end at the end of this calendar year. So that immediately is $200 million more that goes back to the state budget that we've been able to use federal dollars to pay for. And there are other examples like that throughout agencies that's allowed us to say, okay, our state budget dollars are staying flat because we've been able to fill in these gaps with federal dollars. So that was a really long-winded way of saying the Senate baked in the last 2 years of things that will not continue, that it would be really dangerous to assume will continue as part of their plan that they can make counties whole. So what we did, this chart here, I'll explain it a little bit. We said, let's disregard the last 2 years because they were really weird, right? Weird for lots of reasons. Let's look at the last decade, could the legislature have ever kept their promise to make counties whole over the last decade? And from fiscal year 2010 to fiscal year 2019, they couldn't have balanced the state budget and sent, $550 million to counties in any single year. So the most important thing to look here is the yellow bar. So if they were trying to do that, if they were trying to reimburse the counties, there would have been hundreds of millions of dollars of shortfall every single year, fiscal year 10 through fiscal year 19. And in this, we're actually only accounting for that $550 million. I read reporting yesterday that the Senate is now saying, hey, we're going to do this $550 million, and we're also going to do a $250 million income tax cut at the same time. And the reason that you all should care about that is that takes another $250 million out of general revenue that they have to meet all the state needs with and reimburse the counties. And they're talking about reducing what goes into that. So I think it's just important to look at the bigger picture and to really think about the unique aspects of the last 2 years and how heavily the Senate plan is relying on this. All right, next slide. Am I okay on time? I can pick it up or pick up the pace? Okay, I'll fly through the last two. A lot of times we hear that the business and machinery tax is a really bad tax. And I think the research that we've done has called, I think, into question if that's even the right premise. We know that they fund really important services, schools and firefighters and police and all of those things. But I think on the other side, I think we haven't seen evidence exactly that this is a bad tax. And what this slide is it shows the tax incidence of industrial property taxes. And that's really nerdy. But basically, the most important thing that it shows is that this kind of tax, the business machinery and equipment tax, is overwhelmingly not paid by West Virginians. 72% of it is exported out of state. And that's because the things that we manufacture in West Virginia, the things that we extract in West Virginia, our coal, our natural gas, it's not bought by West Virginians largely, right? It's bought by people out of state. A lot of the businesses are ultimately headquartered out of state. So, 3/4 of this would be borne by folks out of state. And generally, folks who study tax policy think that's a really good feature of a tax that's paid by people that aren't your constituents. Hey, that's like a really good thing, right? That's why we put toll booths on roads that people that are just passing through the state on the where somewhere else are, because we can get a little bit of tax revenue from people who are using our infrastructure, using our resources, but not living or working really in our state. Okay, next slide. One thing we hear a lot too is that West Virginia is an outlier in this tax. And I just want to say 35 states tax business machinery and equipment. So it's really just not accurate to say that we're an outlier on this. And overwhelmingly in the states that don't levy this business personal property tax, they have much higher real property tax rates. It all balances out, right? It's going to be one or the other. And in fact, I've even heard things floated on a panel a couple of weeks ago that the Senate president and the Speaker of the House were sitting on. They weren't the ones that said it, but they didn't stop this person from saying it. They said, we'll just raise real property tax rates to offset this. So it all has to balance out somewhere. Next slide. I also just wanted to flag that the Tax Foundation, who does these sort of state rankings on all kinds of things, they actually already say that we have the 9th best business property tax ranking in the country. And that goes back to what I just said. We have pretty low real property tax rates. So your home, commercial property, those sorts of things. So the Tax Foundation, who's a pretty conservative group, advocates for tax cuts in a lot of cases, says we're actually already in the top 10 nationally, and there's no neighboring state that ranks above us with the exception of Ohio. So on the next slide, we'll talk about Ohio for a second. All right. So in 2006, Ohio was kind of in the same position that we're in right now. They wanted to boost manufacturing jobs, and to do so, they said, we're going to eliminate this industrial property tax. And some researchers went and looked at what the impact of that was over the next decade. And basically they found that from 2006 to 2015, Ohio lost manufacturing jobs, which is probably a surprising outcome. But what the researchers found was that lawmakers in Ohio had inadvertently created an incentive for automation. So when they removed this tax on machinery and equipment, they essentially it created an environment or an incentive for big businesses to buy machinery that meant that they needed less workers, right? So they accidentally created this incentive for automation. So I think, you know, in terms of job creation, we're not even seeing the evidence that that would lead to job creation. It might lead to a lot more machinery. Next slide, please. So this one I just, let's just go past this one actually. Okay, I'm trying to wrap it up. This is also just an analysis that we did. We looked at states that have machinery and equipment property taxes and inventory taxes and states that don't, and actually found over the last decade, from 2010 to 2019, states with these taxes are the blue bar, states without are the gray bar. We actually saw more manufacturing job growth in states that do have these taxes. And again, maybe it goes back to the Ohio example, right? Workers, you know, workers are more appealing, labor is more appealing in states that have this. All right, and then we might be, oh, 2 more slides, okay. I think one thing I want to say is there are a lot of ways to boost manufacturing jobs. I think we all have an interest in creating jobs in West Virginia, but by like far and away, business tax cuts and business and tax incentives are kind of the most expensive way that you can do it. Business tax cut on average, this is the cost per job created, is what this chart is. On average, it takes $48,000 in business tax cuts to create one job. On average, it takes $16,600 in tax incentives to create one job. On the other end, things like infrastructure development, neighborhood development, job training. These are things that simultaneously like make your community a nicer place to live for people who are already here, and boost like business, right? Make it more likely that businesses will want to live here. So there are a lot of things we can do really without kind of putting our schools, putting our communities at risk that could continue the trajectory that West Virginia is on, where we're getting a lot of good businesses located. And then I think I just have one more for real this time. This is just kind of the closing. I think, you know, one thing that's counterintuitive, I think, about Amendment 2 is that cutting a tax that funds our schools and fire departments and police and all these things that make our communities safe and make our, you know, workforce educated, I think it's counterintuitive to say that reducing funding for those things would make us have job growth, because those are by and large, you know, the same things that small businesses that are located here want is the same things that families want, right? We want our kids to have a good place to go to school. We want our kids, you know, to be good workers in the future. We want the fire department to come if our business is on fire. We want the police to come if we call. So a lot of times there's a lot of an analysis of the impacts that business tax cuts have on job creation. And the research that I've seen is mostly like the offsetting effects of local governments and local communities having to cut services. Sometimes that results in direct job losses, but sometimes that just results in, you know, poor schools, poor public services. That generally offsets the job creation benefits of the tax cut. And of course, you know, it harms folks who live here. And if those cuts ultimately at the end of the day, after 2 years or 3 years, and we can't use those surpluses to make counties whole anymore, if that ultimately results in us having to raise real property taxes, having to raise sales taxes, those are things that fall way more heavily on our small business owners who are here now, on our families who are here now, while the benefits of this tax cut, a lot of them go to companies that aren't even headquartered in West Virginia. So that's a hard trade off. Okay, I will stop. Thank you.
I guess during your presentation, I might have got a little confused.
I'm sorry.
As you were in the property taxes and business personal property, so I was trying to follow how we're losing money on some slides, but it was about property tax versus personal tax.
So the taxes that could be exempted through Amendment 2 are a category of property taxes. They're the personal vehicle taxes,
Right.
personal property on business machinery equipment, and personal property business inventory. Sorry about that.
But you would have to raise the other tax.
Well, I think it's likely that ultimately there would have to be cuts to services or other taxes raised because the Senate's plan is really based on factors that are unlikely to hold up in the future. So the state's revenue surplus might be able to pay for it this year, maybe next year, but not always. It's one time.
But this is based on that they would do 100% of the cuts.
It is. So that's why I said up to those numbers. Yeah.
Really appreciate you coming with this information.
Thank
I've heard it, so.
Can
Not
I ask
ask my question.
May I ask a question? So with what Commissioner Hinkle just said, it's based upon 100% of those taxes being cut. Basically, what the legislature is asking to do is just give them the right to decide where they want to cut taxes. It may just all be machine and inventory tax and no personal property vehicle taxes.
It could be.
Okay, so your model is based upon it being all of it, but in the end, it may just only benefit business and not even benefit us for like our vehicles, let's say.
That's certainly possible.
It's a possibility. Who knows what the outcome will ultimately be?
Anybody else?
Madam President, I did ask the elected officials to just take a glance at their budget and make cuts to their budget if, as a hypothetical, if their budgets were to be cut 18%. What would that mean for the prosecuting attorney's office, for the circuit clerk's office, Rocky's office? To try to get an idea of if this were to pass, how much it's going to impact those offices, along with our offices. I've done some numbers on ours. I know the fire departments, the fairs and festivals, things will have to be cut back, but I'm curious to see what they came up with of what it would mean for theirs.
Okay. Okay. I'm the prosecuting attorney here in Harrison County. Our overall budget for the last fiscal year was $2.197 million and some odd change. If we were to lose 18%, and I know that's a hypothetical number right now, but somewhere in that $6.6 million that you said that Harrison County stands to lose for county services, somewhere that's going to have to affect all of the elected officials' budgets. Maybe not first, but it's going to trickle down in order to help make up for the loss in revenue. If I was to lose 18% of my budget, and we're going to take my salary out because I believe my salary comes from the state and you all agree. How does that work?
No.
Okay, so it is in there.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so never mind, we'll put my salary back in. So, and I had it both ways. Okay, so if we lose 18%, that's $395,000 of
The
my
state
budget.
just decides how much money. we make.
Okay, gotcha. That's $395,000 of the prosecuting attorney's budget. The majority, the overwhelming majority of my budget is for personnel. I only have $66,000 in expense funds. That includes our mandatory education, our paper, our ink, our books, our computer programs that we have to have. But the majority of what we do in the prosecutor's office is via people's brains. You know, what we think and how we present in court and what we put down on paper, that's all person driven. So if I lose $395,000, I'm losing probably no less than 5 people in my office of 22. I only have 22 and we're going to stand to lose around 5 people because I can't really cut my expense funds. We use 96% of that every single year just to keep us floating. So if I would have to do that at an 18% marker, that's about 5 people. If it's only 10% and we're looking at $219,000, I'm losing 2.5 people, the hypothetical half person, in order to try to keep us afloat. I beg the commission for another person every single year. Losing people is not the answer for my office. We need people. So that's what it stands to do with the prosecutor's office. It's people in this community, people in this town. I mean, that's where, unfortunately, we'd have to look to cut. We could tighten up expenses as much as we can, but ultimately, we're only as effective as our people and the budget we're given. So that's where it gets us. Sheriff?
I don't like to work on what ifs. It's a hard thing to do. I don't think that, the sheriff's office through this will be cut 18% because the commission wants to fund the constitutional officers before the others. So I don't want to scare everybody to death. And
But
say,
that's,
but with this, and
I
I
think
think
people
that
need to be.
I think the volunteer fire departments, the people that are involved with the fairs, the festivals, they need to stand up and say, hey, this is going to affect us first. But I'm not naive enough to think that it's not going to affect the sheriff's office. So I'd hate to stand up here and say, I did the math, that 18% would lose about 11 deputies. So, but I don't want to stand up and say that we're going to lose 11 deputies, because I don't want morale of the deputies worrying about their jobs. I don't want the people out in the rural area to worry about, police protection in their area. But I will say, and certainly, no disrespect to state troopers, we got great state police and state troopers, but their mandatory need is 800, and there's only 600 of them. So I don't think that the states will be able to fill the gap for law enforcement should we, the worst case scenario, lose 11 deputies. So it's, it's something that's going to take a lot of discussions, and people really need to look at, what's happening. And, Gary's here, the school system is one of the biggest hits. Our PROs, we have 6 PROs. And I'll tell you how the state, Gina, you can back me up on this, how they fund grants for PROs, because I heard one person in legislature say that they're going to give block grants to the commission to give out to fund these other programs. Well, this is how they fund the PROs in the states. Every community, city, county that provides a prevention resource officer gets $15,000 for one. If you have 2 or more, you get another $15,000. So it's capped at $30,000. We have 6 here in Harrison County. Now, we're lucky we have a school board that funds 98% of that program. $20,000 comes from the county commission, 30,000 from the state, and 600 and some thousand from the school board. But if the school board's cut, are they going to fund that? Is that going to be a priority? We don't know. So there's a lot of what ifs. So I think that I appreciate, your information, although I don't know that those are numbers that we can go by right now. So I don't want to scare everybody, but again, I'm not naive enough to say that we're not going to see some
It's a what if.
Yeah.
The whole
it's a
thing
what
is a
if.
what if. It's
But
what
I-
they choose to do.
I can tell you, we're very lucky, and I've said it before, we're well-funded, well-trained, well-equipped in the sheriff's office. But if this would happen to the max, then that's not always going to be the case. So I hope that information was helpful.
Thank you, Lauren.
As they said, it's what ifs. I don't have all the specific numbers for our budget, but we would be looking at least 3 to 4 people in the personnel that we would have to lose there. And again, as Robert alluded, it's what ifs this, but it's what if, the biggest thing that we're concerned with is educating voters on what this really does do. That the fact that what they're really doing is voting to give this authority away. That then the legislators can do what they want. This has nothing to do with a reduction. It's just either exempt or not to exempt. But if they exempt all this, we are going to be making cuts. And as all the others have alluded to, we're going to be minor cuts in the things that we use. It's going to be personnel that we're going to have to cut, and that's going to cost every office in this building personnel, and we can't get through with personnel that we now have. And as Rachel said, she's asking for somebody every year, and we would all like to do that because there's always a need for more people, and this would cut our people.
And I think 3 of the amendments, at least 3 of the amendments, are to take away local government and give more control to the state. And I think that's
Agreed.
which is what you were saying.
Thank you, Kelly.
Albert?
I intentionally went last because I'm the smallest of this group here. My office has the least amount of people, and just gathering the information that Kelly presented here. I mean, we're looking at 18%. I'm looking about $150,000 in my total operating budget. Kelly's talking about 25% of Harrison County budget being cut, if I remember correctly, and that would make it around $208,000 in my total operating budget. So, that would be catastrophic to all the constitutional officers if that happened. Previously I was a sheriff, and I know crimes increased, not because of the sheriff's department's fault, but because of society. It's increased since I left. And Robert's doing a great job there, needs more people, more equipment. Rachel's doing a great job in the prosecutor's office, needs more people to prosecute the crime, you know. I don't know a whole lot about the assessor's office, so I'll leave that to Robin. But I do know one thing, if you have more crime, you have more prosecution, and typically you have more civil suits as well, and things like that. So, you know, the clerk's office will need more people, you know, it's just, you know, it's common sense. And if you go take away monies, you know, we won't have more deputies, we won't have more prosecutors, won't have more clerks in the office, and the judges at some point will be overwhelmed because paperwork will be stacked up and not getting to them in a timely fashion. So it just bogs down the whole system, and it's not good for anybody for start talking about cuts without being sure where money's coming from to backfill those cuts.
That's the thing. I mean, we're just now seeing a plan. Can't commit. I mean, the counties, correct me if I'm wrong, have been asking them to come to the table for quite some time. And then they give us this plan that I saw, what, a couple months ago?
Right, as Kelly alluded, she's been at this since 2010. I came into it in 2017, and at that time, it was concerning Senate Resolution 7, which was to do away with business inventory on industrials. That was the main thing. And then Senate Resolution 8 and 9, they increased more of that, and then how it ended up in the House Resolution 3 is where this was created from. It came there and went. The thing is that I tell people, you know, we really want to vote your authority, but if you have, basically, you know, I have hundreds of questions, but basically, if you have one question in your mind, you want to vote to change the constitution. So that's a big if. And then, as we talked about, as Kelly said, and Rachel asked, this is not set in stone that they're going to cut all these. It's going to be whenever they decide. The House and the Senate are not on the same page right now. The governor's coming out against Amendment 2. Then Senator Blair, Senator Tarr are saying that they're not giving the right numbers. But the fact is, they're asking us to give them pretty much carte blanche authority.
That's
Correct me if I'm wrong, they're saying that they'll backfill this money from the state's budget, that they have money in their budget. What happens when A, that money runs out, or B, we get new elected officials in those positions and they decide to change their mind? We've already given away our rights and our powers, and they can decide to stop funding us. Even if they have the money, they can stop backfilling us. Is that correct?
I think the sheriff made a really good point that like you all rely on state money too. So if we're having this one general revenue pot where, you know, the state funding that we get is, you know, part of it, the county reimbursement is part of it. Something like 2/3 of the state budget is, you know, not discretionary. So there's a lot of the state budget that they have to, you know, they have to do the state Medicaid match, they have to do the state share of schools. And, you know, I think the county reimbursement would kind of like fall down the list when times get a little tougher, or if they say, you know, we're cutting everybody 10% across. You know, there are just a lot of uncertainties, especially since it's based on revenue numbers and budget numbers that are really out of the norm. And then to your point, yeah, it's legislators, I think many of them have the best of intentions with this, but the legislature turns over every 2 years. And right now, you all can easily, you know, come talk to the commission about budget requests. Whereas if the state is controlling this, that could be, you know, being one of 55 prosecutors or sheriffs or whoever going to, you know, Charleston every year to fight for your budget. Just makes things a lot harder.
The other thing too, on the money that we're referring to, the 550 million, as Kelly has said, that's not really talking about the levies. They've never really answered a lot of our questions on tips as well. And we've been asking this question, and I'm not getting an answer. And all the money that we're talking about, remember, it does not include public utilities for the railroads. And I don't think there's anybody from the gas or electric company that's going to sit there and pat you on the back for exempting a manufacturer from their taxes, and they're going to pay theirs. So I think this is something they're going to see these there, and that's probably with public utilities, the estimate's about 150 million more there. The railroads, that's probably close to another 100 million. And believe me, they're both going to jump on this. I mean, if it happens, if they exempt it, they're coming after theirs as well.
When's the last time the tax code was updated?
In terms of property taxes, I think there hasn't been a change to the property tax rates or authority since they were placed in the Constitution. in 1932, as far as I know.
It was 1932, they passed it.
They're asking to have the ability to go back and look at that and modify those taxes. The state decided in 1932.
Well, the
Yeah.
voters
The
decided.
voters decided in 1932, so basically the voters are going to decide the Second Amendment whether or not they want to change the way the legislature approves taxes. That's basically what we're looking at.
But they're doing it without knowing a specific plan. They're doing it with devote the authority to them to the plan that they're talking about.
I think it's a hard either way to do it without, until you give them the authority, they're just tossing plans out. Until you give them the authority, then they can come up with a plan. Maybe we should vote on that, but it's
So
a,
that's the thing.
it's a catch. I understand what they're saying. I'm just saying it's a catch. We haven't changed our tax laws since 1932. I think that we ought to be able to visit them once in a while. It's a shame we have to do it this way. but
Well, we've changed a lot of other taxes. We've, I think between 2006 and 2015, cut about $500 million in business taxes. So we've definitely addressed business tax. That's a lot recently.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you all. Anything else? Motion to adjourn. Signify by saying aye. Aye.